Hey you guys, I'm hanging out with Daryl and his brother Daryl, and today we're going to look at firing mechanisms, and we're going to discuss single action, double action, striker fire, take a look what that means for handguns here. So I do a lot of cowboy action shooting, and I use a single action revolver. So when we talk about single action is referring to what the trigger does, and more specifically, how many actions it has. So single action, one action. And what that action is once that hammer is here, this trigger does one action of just releasing that hammer. So in cowboy action shooting for the Single Action Shooting Society, I am using my thumb to actually manually cock the hammer, and then the trigger does its single action of releasing the hammer. But in, other more, modern firearms like the 1911 here, it's the same kind of function. The trigger is still single action, and my first thing that I do, of course, is I cock, and I've cocked the hammer back. Once I pull that trigger the first time, this is what's called recoil operated. So the slide is going to go back because physics, action, reaction, gas is going that way, bullets going that way, slides going this way. And that will actually come back and bring that hammer back. Once the hammer's back, then I can pull. And that works for, a variety. This is a Para Ordnance, Slim Hog here, and it is the same kind of thing. The trigger has that one action of bringing that hammer back. This is a little protector on the hammer, so if you were coming in, I'm not accidentally hitting that hammer. A lot of guns have that. Because the idea of a single action is once that hammer is back, it's very easy to fire. It takes very light trigger pull. So there's some guns that are double action, single action. So like the Beretta 92. So when it's in its carry position, it is in the hammer closed position. First time you pull the trigger, it'll actually bring that hammer back, one action, and then release it. Second action, so that's double action. And this is a DASA, so after I do that, recoil operated, and all my remaining shots are gonna be single action. If we look at a true double action, like the Taurus Judge here, so on this one, what we're gonna do is when we pull the trigger, we'll see that the hammer goes back initially, right? So that's its first action. And then as it goes back the rest of the way, I gotta come in here, it'll do that second action of firing the pistol. So I don't have to manually cock it, although I can manually cock it if I want. Now, when we get into guns such as, I think the one that we think of most often is the Glock, it's what's called striker fire. And what that means is it means that there is no hammer. Instead of the hammer coming down and hitting the firing pin, and the firing pin going into the primer, and the primer launching the bullet down, by igniting those gases, this has a spring, and it operates, similar. The trigger, you could still say, is one action to release that firing pin, but I'm coming in, I've now cocked that spring back, and this is going to release the spring there. So on a striker fire, similar. The slide coming back is what's going to, set that spring, and then pulling the trigger is going to release that spring, releasing the pin there. Same on this is just a smaller model of the same thing. This is a little Springfield here. I like this one a lot. This is around the size that I like to carry if I'm concealed carrying versus a full size there, but same kind of thing. The trigger, one action to release that pin, I have to depress this back safety to do that, and it will then release the spring, hit the primer, etc. So there's different methodology and different reasoning to have any particular gun. The 92, if you think about, police, military, the reason that they like this double action than single action is you want single action because it's quick trigger pull. A double action trigger, you have to pull it a lot harder because you have to do two things with it, right? So it's going to have a longer range of motion to hit all those gears. It's going to be a harder pull on your finger versus a single action. Single action trigger doesn't have to have much pull because it's just letting go. It doesn't actually have to manually, hit a gear and move something. But a double action, single action, if you think about, police, military, having a little extra intention on your first pull could be good. You don't want any accidental discharges, things. Well, nobody wants an accidental discharge, but in those situations, having that is a very good safety feature. The striker fires, being single action, they are, you could say, maybe a little bit more prone to misfiring, just because if it's cocked back and you hit that trigger, it could go. What's nice about this, the Springfield here, is I have a secondary safety here, whereas the Glock, your safety is the finger. Once you go in, it's gonna fire there. So yeah, not much to depress that on that guy. The other thing about striker fire that you'll notice more than the 1911 with its hammer, even if my wrist is a little weak, a lot of times on these guns, because they're blowing back and they're manually hitting this trigger to this hammer to go back here. Most of the time, even if you don't have a good strong firing position, it's usually still going to get there. Versus a striker fire, if you limp wrist a little bit, the physics equation kind of changes, because now there's action going into moving your wrist because you're not in that stronger position. And a lot of times these won't actually go all the way back and you'll get a jam. I think most of those jams on striker fire pistols are operator error more than failure of the firearm. A couple ways that you can correct that. One, shooting heavier ammunition. More is, again, it's physics, right? More force going that way equals more force sending that slide back. So even if you get out a little position a little bit, it's still going to be enough to depress that spring. However, now you've got more felt recoil. The other thing you can do is you can lighten the spring. You lighten the spring, less of it has to go into the spring to reset the spring there. So that's the kind of thing on the striker fire. Striker fire, again, like when you hear single action, double action, the striker fire it's single action on the trigger is what they're talking about. But I think you'll hear striker fire and whatnot when you're reviewing handguns and looking at that term has become, I think, more popular in the last couple of years, even though like striker fire pistols have been around for a long time. They're not new or anything like that, but the use of the terminology, I think, is becoming more mainstream. So I just wanted to kind of take a look at what that means. Again, single action, one action from the trigger, right? Double action, two actions from the trigger. Good. And then striker fire, still a single action trigger, but there's not a hammer. Instead, there is a spring and a pin that has to be reset versus a hammer hitting a pin. So yeah, that is a look at those pistols. And I'd like to say thank you to Daryl. And you guys have happy Halloween. Get out there and shoot.